what I want to kind of do, and again, you've been interviewed before and stuff, but I just want to go back the night before the landing on Iwo Jima and just tell me where you were, what you were doing, what your thoughts were as you were heading towards that island. Do you remember kind of the night before?
Yeah. Well, now, this is what I'm going to question about.
Sure.
Let me tell you briefly, just a second before you put it on your thing.
Okay.
The night before we landed on Iwo Jima, and we had our own church service.
Okay.
And then, as I looked around and looked at them all, I wondered, who's going to be here tomorrow night? Well, 3 of them didn't make it. And that was probably about 12 or 13 or 14 of us in there. But they were coxswain, they were Navy kids, they were all these things. And this is what I did the night before.
No, and that's fine. What you just said was fine. It just, just briefly, you kind of just said it right there, what you did. So you guys had a prayer service, and then you looking around, wondering, and then lead me into the night. Did you sleep? Did you have a breakfast? And then lead me into the next day.
Well, you tell me what you want me to do, and I know from my own standpoint that there's no limit to what I can say in length of time, but I would try to cut it short and break away from a lot of the things.
Yeah, and just give me the opportunity to ask some questions too. But just again briefly, I mean, what are your thoughts? You're a young man. You're going into Iwo Jima. What did you know about Iwo Jima then? I mean, did they tell you anything?
Well, very little, other than what we were taking it so that they could bomb Japan, and that because they were shooting down too many of the planes. And
so you were a gunnery sergeant going into this campaign. You had combat before. Are you? Tell me about the men around you. Are they looking to you for support, for confidence? I mean, and then start telling me the story about going into the beach. If you went in on an LVT, a Higgins boat.
We went in on a Higgins boat.
Okay. Let's start there. The night before, early morning.
Okay.
19th of February.
But you just asked me, and I'll give. You saw the pictures there of what we landed in.
Tell me about the morning of the 19th of February, going into the beach. If you're going down the rope nets, the whole story, and tell me about the men around you, how they're feeling, what they're talking about, and stuff like that.
Okay. Are you ready to go?
Go ahead, go.
Okay. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Keith A. Renstrom. I was a gunnery sergeant in the 4th Marine Division in Company F, 2nd Battalion, 25th Marines, 4th Marine Division. I have been wounded once before I got to Iwo, and so we knew what we were up against. And many of us had been wounded and had returned back to our company because of the camaraderie that we had among ourselves and our men and with the officers and so forth. It's a brotherhood that's unequaled or unparalleled by anybody except those who go under fire. And when you go under fire, I don't care what they say, you have butterflies in your stomach and you're nervous. But being a LDS member of the church and active all my life and doing the things that we did, we got all the LDS kids together the night before we landed on Iwo, and we knew approximately when we were going to land and so forth, and we were scheduled to land at 4 o'clock the day of D-Day, which all changed. But as we were gathered there together, we were sitting in the hallway waiting for our turn to come up so we could have our church service, and we could hear all this music coming out of the thing, and it was on an accordion, and it was Jewish music, and we wondered, it was sort of mournful and so forth like that, and I thought, my gosh, this is... Well, when the time came and we knocked on the door, who came out of there but one of my men who was in there having his own service, I guess, in his own period of time to play his accordion, who was a very professional accordion player. And we thanked him, and we went in and we sit down, and there was one man by the name of James Murray Rawson who had been a returned missionary before he had ever came in the Marine Corps. And so what he did is gathered us together to have prayers. So we had an opening prayer, and then we sit around and we we thanked thee, O God, for a prophet. And then we had the sacrament, which we called, where we blessed the bread and the water and so forth. And then after that, we all took our turn to stand up and bear what we call our testimony of how we feel and so forth. And I, being the gunnery sergeant, was the last one to speak. And as I stood there looking at the guys, wondering what they were thinking, and they told us how they felt, that they were all felt just like we did. You was uncertain of what was going to happen, if you're going to make it till tomorrow night or so forth. And I looked at the group, and there was probably around 14 or 15 of us in there. I just barely get enough in the room. And when it came my turn, I stood up and I told them, I said, being that I'm a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, and you know my record behind you, and there was only one man in my company that was LDS, and that was Clyde Needfelt. And I said, Clyde and I have had good relationship. He knows where I stand, and I know where he stands. And we talked about the people that we had killed before, and we knew that we were going to be killing some more. And we had Iwo Jima we weren't sure what we were going to hit. It was supposed to be a 3-day operation. And as the meeting progressed and everybody said what they had, and I finally bore my testimony and sat down, and then we sang, God be with you till we meet again, because that's what sort of a thing you never know whether you're going to meet on the other side or on this side. And I looked around and I wondered, who is going to be here tomorrow night? Well, 3 of the men were wounded and killed out of this group. Now, I wasn't with them or around them when it happened, but we tried to keep track of our own men.
Tell me about okay, let's go ahead just a little bit now. The morning of the 19th, tell me about getting into the Higgins boats and then starting your
The morning, as we were called off and had our breakfast, we went down to our boat landing places, because we were able to, on the ship, we could see what was happening over there from the time the early morning, and I stayed on the fantail to watch it with my glasses to see what I could see, and we were right on the extreme right flank of all the ships. I think there was only one other ship on our right, and we would sit right there. And that morning, probably right around 8 o'clock or 8:30, this airplane that they have off the cruisers was flying around up there, and we saw him get hit, and the plane just started coming down in a circles and circle and circle until finally it hit the water. Whether he was killed or not, I don't know what happened. They sent boats out there, but then now they were getting right close to the island. Mm-hmm. We were out of range, but we could see all this with our glasses. Mm-hmm. Well, and then that morning, we had just waited and watched the action going on with and we were still close enough that we could watch the battle wagons shoot. And when they shot those guns off, you could see all 9 shells in the air, all going towards the island. They just like huge. They look bigger than they really are, but you could see them all going. You could follow them right over to the island. And boy, when it hit, it would just take up things all kinds of places. Mm-hmm. So as we moved in that day, and finally the orders came down that we were going to have to leave early because the 3rd Battalion had been shot up so bad that they were not going to be able to be in a finding position to withhold a banzai charge if they came at us that night. Mm-hmm. So we are now scheduled at about 11 o'clock to get in the Higgins boats, and we went out to the whole ship was ordered to where you had to go. Now, some of us was off the fantails, and some of us was right in the middle of the ship, and then some off the bow. Mm-hmm. And these little Higgins boats, which we were going ashore in this time, were all circling, and they would come into the boat, and then they would load up with Marines, and then they'd go back out, and everything was really to perfection in orders. Everybody knew exactly where you were going to do and what to do, and nobody got out of line. Everybody knew where they were supposed to be. And as we went, it's kind of a sickening feeling as you get up there and put your hand on the edge of the net, the cargo net that we had to go down to get into some of the boats. Now, the first boats are loaded right then, and then they lower you into the water. But then after they get them down, and then they have to, it takes too long to bring the boat back up, so you have to go over the side, and the ocean is coming up and going down, and you have to time yourself to when you let go of the net, so you're going to drop in the boat and not drop 10 or 12 feet. And so everybody knows how to do it. You're trained to do that. So we're down there, we go down. And so finally, when all the boats were loaded, then we were all circling around the ship. And then they give you run a flag up. And now then you start to what we call the line of departure. And we go in a big long line, and we went right through the cruisers and through the battle wagons, and they were signaling at us, and we were waving at them and giving thumbs up, and some of them were making some gestures that weren't really appropriate, but that's part of the way it was. And finally, we came in on the line of departure. Now, the line of departure are small ships that are all the way along the beach, and you're 10 minutes from the beach, approximately. Now, as we got in this big, long skirmish line from one end of our beach to the other, now we started in, and we didn't come within much fire until we got closer to the beach. And then the salvos started coming down, and the beach just jumped like heck, and we were about 30 yards when the first salvo hit. And it was approximately 12 noon. And as we hit the beach, and one of the main sayings we had is, clear the beach, get off the beach, because they can't move their guns that fast to follow you in or catch you out in the water, so they try to keep all the mortars right on the beach so they can catch you as you unload. Well, the first salvo lit, and the shrapnel hit our boats, and we got ashore in really good shape. There was very few casualties we had right at the start. And as soon as we got off the beach, then we started to move in, and we moved in up over the sand dunes, and you could hardly walk in it. It was like sitting in a grain bin on a farm, and you just keep moving your feet up and down. You just keep sinking in that coarse coral. But in a way, it saved our lives, because the shells would go down deep enough, and then they would blow up instead of out on the top of the ground. If the ground had been hard, then they would have burst right on top of the ground, and those shells go off, the shrapnel's going 300 miles an hour, and you can imagine what it does. It cuts you to pieces. But anyway, as we got in there, we turned to the right, and then we went right down the beach to as far as we could go to get down to what we called the quarry. And when we got down to the quarry, then we relieved the 3rd Battalion, and they fell back, and we went up and took their position. So our right flank was right in the water, and then into the quarry, and up the quarry on right over the top of where a lot of the Japanese emplacements were, to almost to the airfield, where we tied in with another company. But just while we were coming along there, my company commander and I were together, Captain Joslin, and we saw Macy was probably about 20 yards or 30 yards ahead of us, and I saw him get hit, and his legs went out from under him, and he went right down, and Joslin said, "Gunny, get over there and see how bad he's hit." Well, when I came over there, Macy was down in the bottom of this big, deep shell hole, and he had his pants down, and he was saying, "And not even any blood, not even any blood." And what had happened, a piece of shrapnel about the size of my hand had hit him flat like that, right on his hip pocket. And in his back pocket, he had a cribbage board. And that cribbage board was just nothing but slivers, like you have a piece of board laid out in the road and a car runs over the top of it. It saved his life. And he didn't even get any blood or anything out of all that. And he was just saying, I don't even get a Purple Heart. I don't even get a Purple Heart. But it knocked him right down. Well, I said, come on, Macy, we got to get going again. And he was a little Italian kid. And so we started moving on in again. And then one of the other men up there, one of the older sergeants, he says, Gunny, come here. And I worked my way over to him. We were down there looking at things over. And he says, you know, a guy could get killed around here, couldn't he? And I says, yeah, we can. And so anyway, we moved into our line up on the quarry, and our mortar sections got in position as we set up there. And so actually part of our first firing of our guns was with our mortar section. And then I was right up above the cliff up there, and we started to move in when we first saw our first Japanese. And there was one of them come crawling along, and we let him get about halfway to us, so he was only about 150 yards from us, and here come about 3 more of them. And so then we waited it out, and we opened fire on them and got them all right there, just bam! They were done, and then they pulled back, and then we moved down in sort of a little low spot, probably maybe about the size of a football field. And we moved down in there, and Sergeant Livingston and his squad were ahead of us, and somebody hollered, Livingston's hit. Well, he was shot right through the throat and killed him right there. And then there was a couple other wounded guys. We got them out of there, and we came back up, called the mortar section in, and they shot some more mortar shells in. So we moved in again, and we moved in we were about 200 yards further in, but then we had to tie in for the night, and we didn't have enough men to go from the beach all the way into the airfield and then back down. So we had to, which just breaks your heart, we had to give up the ground that we had already taken and tie in right at the top of the quarry. So we had enough men to hold the line, and we had to be sure that there was about 100 yards or so down at the bottom of the quarry over to the ocean, and it was a perfect spot for a bonsai charge. So I put double guns there, so we had not only the water-cooled, but we had the air-cooled guns. Now, normally we carry the air-cooled guns because they're lighter and easier to handle than use the big water-cooled guns for the things at night time. So we put 4 of these water-cooled guns along with one section of machine guns, so we have plenty of machine guns to handle along with the BARs and so forth. But on Iwo Jima, the admiral who had planned the attack, his name was Reverend Wachi, was a very brilliant man, and this is the first time that the Japanese never had a bonsai charge when we hit the beaches, because usually we had learned how to handle it, and they never did crack our lines. And that's the weakest time, but because of the training and the things that you go through and the lessons you'll learn how to fight. And that's the Marine tradition. We know how to fight, because the only thing we understand is to win. And the whole basic core of the Marine Corps is around this element. Know your enemy, know what his weaknesses are, and then play hard on the weaknesses. And so we sit there that night. We were hit several times on top, and some of our men were shelled. There were about 4 or 5 of them right up on top of one of the big emplacements, and one of the shells lit right on top of them and blew them right off, and they were all killed right there. And that really shakes you up pretty bad. And then one of our officers the next day he came in there, and he had just left his squad, one of the squads of his 3 squads in his platoon, and one of his runners was there, and he'd come back to the CP, and when he went back, a shell had lit right in that foxhole and had killed 3 of them, and 2 of them were wounded, and so he came running back, and he was just almost out of it. And I grabbed him by the leg and pulled him down, and tears was in his eyes, and he was just saying, "What can I do? What can we do? What can I do? What can I do?" And my company commander just said, and he says, "What you do is act like a Marine Corps officer and go back there and do your duty." And we sit back there, and I thought, boy, that's kind of harsh language, but it's what I would do, and same thing. So anyway, when we got through that day, and now it was nighttime, we had to go back down to the beach and get all of the water and the ammunition. Now there was one thing that my company needed, and that was illuminating mortar shells. And that was a premium item, and you just couldn't get them. You had to know the right people and know how to barter and so forth. Now a lot of times people think, and you see the movies, you run back here to the supply tent and you get what you need and go back up on the front lines. Well, that isn't the way it is, because you're always short of something. And so 60 millimeter illuminating mortar shells was a premium item, and we used them because when we got it, we'd light up the line that night and so forth, and it's a lot easier to see what you're shooting at, and you can see got some light on. But when we did that, everybody was numbered like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and everybody knew who 2 was, and everybody knew who 1 was. So whenever you were going to shoot the mortars off, either 1 or 2, you just pass it along the word, "Shut your eyes," and they would shut their eyes. The other one would stay open, and then when the flare went off, then the ones with their eyes shut could still see, while the others' eyes were focusing back to the darkness again. So these are some of the things that little tricks that you learn to handle it.
Can I, for a second, interrupt you? Can we go back to the landing? Were you under fire when you landed on the beach that day?
Mortar shells.
Okay, nobody got hit, you said?
Well, we got a few casualties, but not like they. What we did when we was on the beach, we hit the beach and cleared it, and the salvo lit just ahead of us. And then when we cleared the beach, the next salvo lit right behind us. They missed the timing. And had they hit us when we were still trying to get over that sand dune, we would have had a lot of casualties.
Tell me your thoughts, the best you can remember, going in on that Higgins boat before you landed. I mean, were you nervous? Were your guys talking to you? Were there people doing the sign of the cross? I mean, what's going on in that boat as you...
Well, I was with my company commander, and as you're going in, believe it or not, several of the groups were playing this game called Battleship. And they were sitting there playing Battleship, laughing and just joking like you're going on maneuver somewhere. There wasn't any, I don't remember any physically high tension that you see portrayed in the movies. It was our job to do it, and we were trained to do it, and we just did it. Now, Jagerio, who was our radio man, I used to think he's got more guts than anybody. When he would get in that boat, he would get seasick. So seasick, he couldn't even move, and he would just lay right there. He had an old big gallon can that he brought with him from the commissary, and he'd heave into that thing, and then he'd empty it out and sit back there, and he would just try to go to sleep and try to settle himself down and so forth. And so when we hit the beach, somebody would carry his radio ashore and then put it on his back, and then he was fine.
Now, again, you've been in combat, but you know, I sit here, I listen to you talk, and I can't even imagine what it would have been like. But tell me about, were you able to help anybody that was wounded? I mean,
oh yeah.
What are you seeing? I've heard some pretty.
Well,
you know, I've heard a lot of Marines were killed and wounded. I mean, were you seeing that around you?
Yes, there were dead Marines and wounded Marines, and the hard thing to do is when you haven't time to stop and take care of all the wounded. You've got to get to your objective, to your assigned objective. Now, if you stop and start taking care of the wounded, you'd never get there. And so we just had, if you can live through the first day, fine, but you're on your own. I mean, pretty much the corpsmen were back there taking care of them, but they can only take care of so many. And so you have walking wounded, and you have wounded that have to be carried on stretchers, or you haven't got the manpower to take right there in the first elements of the battle to even take them to the beach. And it was safer to leave them up on the sand dune than it was to take them back on the beach, because the beach would get hit and the bodies would get hit. So you're not only walking on wounded Marines, you're walking on guts and lungs and pieces of human flesh and arms and legs, and all that stuff it's all over the place. I mean, in some places a lot more than others, because their guns didn't move that much. So if you happen to be in a place where they weren't hitting, then you cleared. And we were just fortunate that we missed both the one coming in and the one after we cleared the beach. Now, some of the boats got hit. They were still on the beach, but we were clear of the beach and the boats got hit. But I couldn't tell you whether the corpsmen were killed or the boatsmen were killed or what, because our mind now was to get to our objective, what we called our O1 line, and that was to our right and up in the quarry.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a question. You're probably going to lead up to this, but for time's sake, I want to ask you this now. But tell me about the flag raising, where you were, what you remember about that.
About the what?
The flag raising.
Oh, well, the flag raising came about 4 days after we were there, something that thing, and all I can remember about it, we were so far away from it that one of the officers, I think Captain Smith, says, "Look, there's some action on top of Sarabachi." And so I turned my glasses, and I was looking through my glasses like this, and I could see a lot of people up there. And I have no idea which flag raising that we saw, whether it was the first, the second, the third, or the fourth. Whatever we saw and we did see a flag come up, but I don't think it was the one that got all the publicity. I think because the time they got up on top of there, it took them a couple or 3 days to get up there and so forth. But as far as the flag was up there, it was a gratifying feeling inside to know that we had taken the highest ground on the island, and so now we had control over them, and they didn't have control over us. Because when you sit up there, you can direct fire right down their throat. Our supply area got hit twice. And it got hit once with a Japanese plane that flew over and dropped bombs on it, and just like a wild 4th of July celebration, shells are going all over the place. But as far as the flag is concerned, we all felt a feeling of pride and a feeling of security was coming because we had taken the high ground.
Now, you were a gunnery sergeant, so what was your job on the beach? What exactly are you doing now? I mean,
well, what I was doing is stayed with a company commander. You have it organized so that your platoon leaders and your officers know what they're doing, and we would come along behind with the radios and in support of it, and to see that things got done. Sure. And that was my job, to go out and check and make sure things were in and report back to my company commander. This is what we're doing, this is what we need to do, this is where we're going. We've got to get this stuff up here. We've got machine guns. We've lost 2 guns now. We don't know where they are because the guys are back there somewhere. We don't know whether they're wounded, whether they're hit. And then pretty soon here they come up with the guns. So, I mean, everybody knows where you're going and what you have to do. And sometimes they get pinned down and they have to take their time to get out of there.
What do you think was the worst thing that you saw there? I mean, you've mentioned a few things, but...
Well, I think the worst thing that I saw that really shook me up, it was little Lennox, who was a young man who should never have been in the Marine Corps to start with. He sort of had a mentally retarded type thing. He couldn't understand I used to work with him a lot because he was with me for a long time. And when we got transferred back to the East Coast, he went and up to the company commander, said he wanted to go with me, and I was a corporal then. And so they were glad to get rid of him, and so he came with me, and I told Lennox, I said, one thing you do, Lennox, is you get a haircut every week, and then we're going to get along good. But sometimes the guys would make fun of him and play with him, and I put him with a squad leader who was just an excellent guy. And I firmly believe, even to this day, no chain is any stronger than the weakest link. And if Lennox was the weak link, then we need to take care of him. Now, he was a good shot. He was a good BAR man. He did what he was told to do, and he didn't question it. He just did it. When these guys got knocked off that pillbox that day, and I walked over there to see him, Lennox was laying there, and the whole side of his head, like this, was just gone. And there was just a vacant spot up inside there, and you could actually look through his skull, through his eye, and see the light. And that was, I think, is sometimes I have control over all that stuff, but every once in a while there's things like that bounce up to you that you never know when it's going to happen. I'll be driving the car sometime, I watch a movie, or I never know when these things will happen. But I've never had any nightmares over any of it. But anyway, I think that really kind of shook me up about as much as anything. And then Cobb, when we started going up the quarry, and I was up on top of it, and Sergeant Cobb was coming up with his machine guns, and he was coming up there, and he got about halfway up, and this shell lit and blew his right leg and injured him for life. But he fell backwards, and he fell backwards down, and he kept calling for, Gunny, 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 help me, Gunny, help me. Well, that, I couldn't do anything right then. There was nothing I could do until we got the guns up there. And they couldn't run anywhere else. It was just a little narrow trail. So when the last man came up, then I went right back down there, and he was still laying there, and I crawled over by him, and I said, Cobb, this is Gunny. And he put his arms around me and hugged me, and I says, you're all right, you're not that bad. And I said, let's give you a good drink of water right now. And so I helped him get a good drink of water, and then the corpsman by then was down there to take care of him, and Leonard, he took care of him and bandaged him up, and then I had to get back up on the hill, and I said, Cobb, I'll see you later, and you get back up there, they'll get you out of here. So they moved him back down behind the quarry where it was more reasonable safe. You'd have to take a mortar shell to get him. They couldn't get him by machine gun or rifle fire. And for this story, since you asked on this, 50 years later, I was going to my reunion back east with C.D. Parman and Waterton, and we were driving back there. One was from Oklahoma, and one was from Texas. And I flew from here to Texas. And then we went and we stopped off to see Cobb because he was in the hospital. And 50 years from the day I had my arms around Cobb in that hospital. And his wife was there, his kids were all there. And as I looked at him and everybody was talking to him, and I went over, I was the last one there in the room, and I reached down and I put my arms around him. And I said, Cobb, do you know what happened 50 years ago today? And he says, yes. I said, I've got my arms around you like I had then. And tears came into my eyes, and tears came into his, and But that was camaraderie that, and I thought of all the crazy things to have that same thing happen that had happened to me 50 years later, the same day, but not the same hour, but the same day that I had held him in my arms on Iwo Jima. And he told me, he says, Gunny, I have raised my family with you. He says, you were my example. And he says, my kids, and all these kids tell me the same thing. He says, we heard about you, Gunny, all our lives. The Gunny would do it this way. The Gunny would do it that way. So it was a great honor for me to have that privilege to meet his wife, and she's a lovely person, and his kids are just outstanding kids. And so all these men that as you find out in their lives, they were privates and POCs and corporals and sergeants, are extremely well behaved and have made a name for themselves in their businesses and so forth. And what they did as a private, they became very professional people.
Did you see the 4th Division cemetery on Iwo Jima? Did you walk through that at all?
Oh, no, I didn't last long enough. My brother-in-law, who you saw his picture down there, he walked through that twice so that he'd heard that I'd been killed, so that he could come home and tell my family that I had been killed, and he saw my grave. But no, they were just there was no cemetery when they were just laying them out on the top of the ground. They hadn't even had time to do anything.
Then you were wounded.
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
Well, it was the 11th day on Iwo, and we were still pushing through all this crazy end where we were fighting in was just ruts and grooves and little canyons and just rough terrain is really what. And there was a lot of tunnels, and we were knocking these tunnels out and sealing them off. And as forget his name now, Sergeant Terry got shot and killed, bullet right between the eyes. And he was laying there, and so the company commander says, Gunny, will you go up and take over his platoon? So I went up and I got everything organized again. We had to knock out this machine gun, and we got it all set, and we got the fire coming in on it like we're supposed to do with our mortars, and we even had some help from the battalion with their 81s, and after we had a pretty good fire arrangement on top of that, then we moved out, and this Japanese guy, I saw his hand come up over this little wall and hit his helmet, detonate the grenade, and their grenades go off in 7 seconds. So that's quite a long period. Ours go off in 4. So in 7 seconds, you can pick it up and throw it back at them, or if you got time you got to know your timing, and you grab it. Well, as I got up there and we knocked out the position, they were ahead of me, and I was back behind them a little bit, and he was off to our left. And I saw the grenade come, and the grenade came down, and if you take your rifle and put it right up against the grenade and pull the trigger, it'll blow the grenade to pieces. And the reason I came up with this is that in the first battle we went in, several of the Marines, one got the Congressional Medal of Honor for that, when a grenade lit in in the marshals there, and he put his whole body on the grenade, and he took the concussion, but he saved these other men and saved the machine gun. Well, I thought there's got to be a better way than doing that. And so when we got down on Kwajalein Atoll, there was all kinds of Japanese stuff around there. I had my Tommy gun, and I take grenades and I'd set them out there, and I'd shoot them with my Tommy gun and see how close I could get to them. And I found out, man, that worked out great. So if you could get it and shoot it, you do it. Well, I had a new kid with me, and these I don't know what kind of trees, but they had roots that grew like this, and the grenade lit right in between one of those, and he hollered, he says, "Gunny, I can't get it, I can't hit it." And I knew the time element was just about there. So I, just in that fraction of a second, I turned to face the grenade, and the grenade went off. I still have in my left arm 2 pieces of shrapnel here, and I still have a piece behind my heart that slid along my rib. It's still in, so I still have 3 pieces in there. Then several pieces hit my helmet. 1 piece went under my helmet, through my lip, down into my jawbone, and that's what I was evacuated for. And I came down in there, so as soon as that had happened, I still went on with my men, and we made sure that that machine gun was wiped out. Then I walked back to the battalion, or back to my company commander, and they called the corpsman up there, and he put a little bandage on me, and then they took me down to the beach and put me on an R boat and went out to the hospital ship, and then I wasn't seriously wounded, and I sat back on the fantail of that ship, wishing the heck I was still on the island, and I thought, but I wasn't sure I could be, and I could feel this. I had a pretty good, you can't see it now, but years ago, it was a big white spot right down through there, and whenever I'd take a picture, this white spot would show up. It used to be sort of embarrassing, but now it seems to blend in, you never even notice it. But
let me see how much tape we got left here, but let me kind of skip ahead a little bit here because I want to make sure I get these questions in. But you know, we're looking back 60 years now. It's like, you know, 60
years.
Yes, it's a long time. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. First one is, what does freedom mean to you, Keith? And, you know, in light of what you've been through, World War II, society today, what does freedom mean to you? And tell me about the price for freedom.
Freedom is probably the most wonderful thing that we can even comprehend. Freedom, to be free. Now, along with your question, I was on Saipan and Tinian this year on the 60th anniversary, and those people really appreciate freedom. And they would grab us and hold on to us and didn't want to let go, have our signatures, and tears would be running down their faces, and they'd say, "Thank you for giving us our freedom. Thank you for giving us our liberty." Now, the background, the Spanish had them for hundreds of years. In the 1880s, the Germans came in and took over. And at the end of World War I, the Germans lost all that. And then the Japanese came in. They could not even own land in their own country because they were just slaves. And they appreciate what United States did. They love freedom. And in all the parades that I have been in, and in my own Civil War group that I have, and all the parades that I've been in, and hundreds of them, I've never, ever in my life witnessed people that everybody had a flag, everybody stood up, put their hand over their hearts. Everybody did it, and I can remember this old lady, we could see her in the truck I was in coming down, and the other Marines that were in there with us all served on Saipan and Tinian, and they helped her up off of her bed. She was on a kind of a movable bed type thing. Held her up, she stood up, an old lady weaving, her son and her daughter holding her, and she had her hand over her heart, and she had freedom. And that was the one thing that I just, those people, nobody will sit around. And I see athletes, and I see people in high positions, political people, when the flag goes by, they don't even pay any attention to it. That hurts me, that they can't appreciate what the lives of the men and the sacrifices that they have given, their eyesight and their limbs and their hearts, and they've given their everything they could do, their lives, if they called for it. And to see people not appreciate that, that is what's wrong with a lot of our so-called young society that think they want everything given to them and they don't have to pay for it. But freedom is going to cost you blood, it's going to cost lives. But as a Marine, I'm still dedicated that if I was called upon it, I could still do a darn good job. And I would be proud to be there supporting what's going on in the world today, that people know what freedom and the feelings of freedom are, that you can go to sleep at night and not worry about somebody breaking into your house and killing you, or like they do all over the place in the world. But this freedom that the Americans have a choice thing throughout the world, they look to us for it, but sometimes our own stupidity of some of our people can't get the message that somebody's going to have to die to keep it.
Do you think World War II veterans get enough recognition today?
Oh, I don't know. I think time. Oh, I will say this. How does your generation feel right now about the towers that went down? I don't think you feel as strongly about that as I do. To me, that would be the impelling thing. I would sit up at night watching that thing, and my wife would say, "Why don't you go to bed?" And I said, "I gotta watch what's going on. This is real life. There's real here. It's going on in Iraq. It's going on in everywhere you go around. Here it is. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting. They're giving them a chance." And if the Iraqi people could get the word, what freedom really means to them, some of them have, but the ones who want the power don't want to give up their power, and they don't want to give up their fortunes and the things that they've got there until somebody has to take it away from them. And I don't care. What they're doing in Iraq is securing our freedom right now. And I don't care who they are or what they are, whether Republicans, Democrats, who they are. Those men need the support of the people back home. Because when you're under fire, boy, you want to live. You don't want to die. Everybody wants to live. But as a Marine, we know we're trained to fight. We know how to fight. And they leave us alone, we'll get the job done. But the big mistake that the Bush administration made, I don't blame President Bush. I blame the chiefs of staff who, in their inexperience and not realizing the kind of an enemy they're fighting. We fought an enemy just like they're fighting now. The Japanese were dedicated to dying. These people are dedicated to dying. You cannot negotiate with people that are willing to give up their lives. You have to kill them, and you have to kill them until they finally will decide they've had enough of it. And that's why they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, I never thought in my life that I would ever have a Japanese battle flag flying in my home. But I sent my son John back to Kobe, Japan, as a missionary for the LDS Church. And he met all kinds of Japanese. And he had a Japanese boy come to my home, sit down, and he didn't know anything about World War II. And he would sit there and cheer in Tora, Tora, Tora. He was cheering for our side. I mean, and it was sincere. It wasn't that, because they don't know. But Japan is a good example of what freedom has done for them. But the military had to be taken out in order to give it. And we, as Marines, fought that battles. And the Japanese, may I just say this, Japan had not lost a single battle for 1,000 years until they met the Marines on Guadalcanal. And that changed history, because those Marines who died on Guadalcanal and were wounded on Guadalcanal took away the Japanese aggression. From that day, they were now in the defensive. And you cannot win a war in defense. You have to win it through aggression, and you have to know what you're doing. And thankfully that I feel proud to be a Marine. I guess you can feel that in my lifetime, my kids, when I take them in the parade, my sons, who run the parades now because they think I'm too old to do it, but they go down the line, and when they see people that are not standing up, they go over to them and tell them to stand up and put their hand over their heart. Say, this is the Civil War group. Get your hand over your heart. And people appreciate it. And all the veterans are going just like that. Tell them, tell them, tell them. So there's a part of my dedication to my life and for you and so forth, that I believe freedom to be the great thing. To be free is worth dying for.
Well said. I've got two more quick questions. I'm almost. I want to make sure I get this in. The tape's just about done, but two questions. Why did you come back, Keith? I mean, a lot of men did. Why did you survive?
I survived by sheer luck. I don't think I survived because I used to study everything I could about the Japanese. I haven't told you a lot of the good stories because it has nothing to do. You won Iwo Jima, but I feel that I did have a spiritual side of my life that gave me the strength to do things that I normally wouldn't have done otherwise. That I firmly believed. This may be hard for people to understand, but I never have ever feared death. To fear it, if it come, it come. I've been in conversations with guys right on Iwo Jima when Chambliss was up there as our mortar man, and I was kneeling down in front of him, and I said, "Chief, you better get down." He was from Oklahoma, and Chambliss was his name, and just a super part Indian kid, just a super sergeant. And I said, "Chambliss, you better get down." Well, he didn't, and Captain Smith was right there with me. This bullet came in the back of his pack, hit a spoon, and blew his spoon right through his chest. And I got blood and lungs all over my face and hands, all over this stuff. And I still have the little book that I have with some of his blood still in it, because I had to write down. He wanted mortar shells and stuff for that night, and I was getting it then at that time. But that's one of the things that happened to you. It wasn't just happened today, it was happening every day. And you go along like this constantly. But I feel that they say, well, there's no atheists in the foxhole. And I don't believe that, because I had one kid who really believed he was an atheist. And we used to talk a lot. But he honestly and sincerely believed that when he died, his body would decompose, and that would be go up in a tree or something, so forth. And he sincerely believed. He was a great kid, brave, everything you wanted to have, but he was truly an atheist. And he's the only one that I've ever noticed. Usually when I was a GI and I'd get the guys together, and I said, I don't care what church you go, you either go Catholic, Protestant, the LDS church, or this Protestant church over here, pick out the one you want, but you go to church. And they say, well, I'm an atheist. And do you believe in God? And he'd say, yes. And I said, well, then you're not an atheist. Go to church. So I made them all go. That was one thing, as being I didn't care what church they went to as long as they went to a church. So.
One more question. Do you think society is forgetting what happened in World War II as a whole? Are we forgetting?
Yes. It's hard. It's hard for you, even though you've been around a lot of this and heard a lot of us talk to you, to really, truly feel what we feel inside of us. And I talk to a lot of veterans, in Korea, and I think the Korean vets have been shamefully, and it makes me so mad to feel that the government places them in a position. Here's the thing, when the government, even right now, they train you to kill. You know how to kill. You're going out there to kill the enemy. Now you're out there killing the enemy. They say, well, you can't do it that way. You got to do it this way. You can't negotiate. You just got to knock them off. And boy, I tell you, this just blows me away. I didn't realize it when I was on Saipan, but there were 30,000 Japanese died on Saipan. We lost 3,400 and some odd Marines killed. And then there was about 12,000 of us killed and wounded. So there was about double wounded and that's about the right ratio. So in fact, I'd like to say one other thing for you. On Saipan, I met an airline pilot. And we were sent down to the beach where I had fought, and how they had a big luau. I mean, it was fabulous dinner that they had for us. And we were riding back in the same thing, and he saw Gunnery Sergeant Renstrom, and it says, and my little tag says 4th Marine Division. And he says, you were in the 4th Marine Division, Gunny? And I said, yeah. And he looked at me and he says, I want to thank you because of what you did for the Air Force. He says, we saved 1,100 planes. 1,100 planes were saved because of we taken Iwo Jima. And my wife was with me when this first experience happened, and we were in Houston, and I was walking down the airfield, and here this handsome-looking man came walking up, and he saw my hat right there. Yeah. 4th Marine, and he saw me, and he just walked right up, his arms out like this, hugged me. Well, you know, what are you, a stranger hugging you in an airport? You know, you go, hey, what's going on here, brother? And he says, you in the 4th Division? And I says, yes, I was. And I'm going to my 4th Marine Division reunion. And big tears come running down his face. And he says, I owe my life to you. He says, thank you for what you did. He says, I was flying my B-29. 2 motors were gone. We had genused all of our machine guns and ammunition. We had 1 gun left just for a little protection. We had thrown everything out of the plane, everything we could to stay afloat. We could never have made it back to Guam or Tinian. And he says, we were able to crash my plane just off the beach from where you landed. And he says, I had wounded aboard. I saved my whole crew. Now, my wife was with me on that. And then the next time it happened, another pilot, and why I didn't get their names, it happened so quick he just walked past me, and then he came back. He said, were you in 4th Division? And I says, yes, I was. He said, were you on Iwo Jima? And I says, yes, I was. And same story again. He says, I owe my life to you. So we saved 27,000 airmen lives. And it cost us just under 6,000 Marine dead, and about dead and wounded about 21,000. So it's a trade-off. Some lose for others to live, and that is freedom.
Can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Can I have you put on that 4th Division hat and give a salute into the camera for me? Well, I do this with the veterans, and it's really, you'll see why I'm doing this when I'm done with the film. But I'll tell you when I'm ready here. I'm just going to have you give me a salute and hold it. Go ahead. Okay. What do you say when you release? What do they tell you? What's the order that they say? Do they say, when they tell you to salute, what do they say? Present arms, or what?
No.
What do they say in there?
Just hand salute. Then you go like 2.
Okay, what is the 2? What's that?
Or just
Because that's what I've heard that they say that. Keith, give me one more, please.